The moving truck rattled down the narrow suburban street, its engine grumbling in protest before grinding to a halt in front of a modest, weather-worn house. Elena Russo stepped out of her faded sedan, stretching her stiff back as she looked at the place she was about to call home. It wasn't much. White paint chipped from the shutters, weeds crept across the small front lawn, and the porch railing leaned as though it had grown tired of holding itself up. But to Elena, it was more beautiful than any mansion. This house was freedom. Beside her, Lucas scrambled out of the back seat, clutching his battered superhero backpack. At 6 years old, his boundless energy was a force of nature. He raced to the front steps and turned back with a grin that made Elena's heart ache. "Mom, it's got a porch! Can we put a swing here?" Elena smiled, brushing a lock of hair from her face. "Maybe one day. First we unpack, okay?" He nodded solemnly, as if she'd handed him a sacred mission, before darting back toward the movers unloading boxes from the truck. Elena's eyes roamed the neighborhood. It was quiet, lined with maple trees, just starting to turn amber with the season. A couple across the street peeked from behind their curtains, whispering. Another neighbor waved politely before disappearing back inside. Most faces were curious, but cautious, as if measuring the newcomer. Then her gaze fell to the house at the end of the cul-de-sac. It was different. Larger, elegant, perfectly maintained. The lawn manicured with military precision. Dark cars gleaming in the driveway. Men in suits lingered near the entrance, their movements sharp, purposeful. Not the kind of idle loitering one expected in suburbia. And then she saw him, Dante Romano. He stood on the wide stone porch like a king surveying his empire. Tall, broad-shouldered. His dark shirt rolled at the sleeves revealed strong forearms inked with faint tattoos. Even from a distance, Elena could see the sharpness in his features. Eyes that seemed carved from steel, a mouth set in a line that rarely softened. A cigarette glowed between his fingers as he exhaled a curl of smoke, his gaze sweeping the street until it landed squarely on her. For a heartbeat, Elena froze. His eyes pinned her, dark and unflinching, as though he could see past her guarded expression, past the tired smile she wore for Lucas' sake, past the walls she'd built around her heart. She looked away quickly, forcing herself to pick up a box from the trunk. The last thing she needed was trouble, and Dante Romano radiated nothing but it. One of the movers passed behind her, muttering under his breath. "Don't stare too long," he warned his partner. "That's Romano's house." Elena caught the name, her pulse quickening. She didn't know who Dante Romano was, but the way the man said it, low, edged with fear, told her enough. Inside the house, the air smelled faintly of dust and old wood. Elena set the box down in the living room, glancing around at the cracked walls and sagging curtains. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. After years of running, from bills, from heartbreak, from a life that had crumbled faster than she could rebuild, this house meant safety. "Mum," Luca's voice rang from the porch. "Can I ride my bike in the street?" "Stay close," she called back, peeking through the window as he zipped down the sidewalk. Relief and pride mixed in her chest. He finally looked like a child again, carefree and laughing. But her relief faltered when she noticed Dante still on his porch. Cigarette burned nearly to the filter, his gaze lingering on her son. Not threatening, not unfriendly, just watching. Elena's hands tightened on the window frame. Whatever his story was, whatever power he held over this street, she silently vowed to keep Luca far from it. What she didn't know was that Dante had already noticed her long before she noticed him. And something about the woman with weary eyes and the boy with the superhero backpack stirred an unfamiliar unease in his chest. He didn't know why, but he couldn't look away. The following morning, the street was still damp from a light overnight rain. Elena was already outside, sleeves rolled up, as she wrestled with the stubborn engine of her old sedan. She needed it to work. Her job interview at the local diner was only hours away. She turned the key again. The car sputtered, coughed, and died. "Come on," she muttered, smacking the steering wheel. From across the yard, a voice cut through the quiet, deep, controlled. "You're flooding it." Elena startled, looking up. Dante Romano leaned casually against the black wrought iron fence separating his pristine yard from hers. He wore a dark jacket over a fitted shirt, the morning light catching the edge of his sharp jaw. His cigarette smoke curled lazily in the damp air. Her heart gave an unexpected thump. "Excuse me." He flicked the cigarette away, his gaze never leaving hers. "You're pressing too hard on the gas. Old engine like that, you gotta be patient." Elena straightened, brushing her hands on her jeans. She hadn't asked for his advice, but something about his tone, confident, faintly amused, made it hard to ignore. "I'll manage, thank you." She popped the hood, leaning over to inspect the mess of wires and metal. Before she could protest, he was already moving. Dante crossed the lawn with an ease that spoke of someone who expected doors to open before he even reached them. He came to stand beside her car, the faint scent of cologne and tobacco cutting through the smell of oil. "You're Elena, right?" he asked, peering into the engine. Her chest tightened. "How do you know my name?" He smirked, not looking up. New neighbors don't go unnoticed around here. And the moving truck wasn't exactly subtle. Elena frowned, watching his sure hands adjust a loose connection. He didn't seem like the type of man who fixed cars for fun, yet he moved with a precision that unnerved her. Luca came bounding out of the house, his sneakers splashing through puddles. Mom, look what I found." He held up a worm proudly. Elena groaned. "Not inside." "Luca." Dante glanced at the boy, and something in his expression shifted. The hard line softened, just slightly, as Luca trotted over, fearless. "Hi," Luca said brightly. "I'm Luca. Do you live next door?" Dante crouched down to his level, his dark eyes locking on the boy's. "Yeah. I'm Dante." Elena stiffened. Hearing the name again sent a ripple of unease through her. The mover's warning echoed in her head. That's Romano's house. But Luca didn't notice. "Cool, you have a big house. And a dog. Can I pet him sometime?" For the first time since she'd seen him, Dante smiled, not the cold smirk he wore so naturally, but a small, genuine curve of his lips. "Maybe." Elena cleared her throat. "Luca, don't bother." The car engine roared suddenly to life. She spun around. Dante had straightened, wiping his hands casually on a handkerchief he seemed to produce out of nowhere. "There," he said simply. "Battery's on its last leg, but she'll hold for now." Elena blinked, torn between gratitude and irritation. "I thank you. You didn't have to." "I know," he replied, his tone unreadable. His gaze lingered on her for a moment longer than necessary, then on Luca, before he finally stepped back. "But now you won't miss whatever it is you're running off to." Her stomach tightened at the words. They sounded casual, but they cut deeper than she expected. She didn't like the idea of him reading her so easily. "I don't know what you think you see, Mr. Romano," she said carefully, "but I'm not looking for handouts. Or trouble." His eyes glinted, amused by her sharpness. "Relax, Elena. Just being neighborly." And with that, he turned and walked back to his house, as if the conversation was over. Elena stood frozen, Luca tugging at her sleeve. She wanted to shake off the encounter, to dismiss the strange pull in her chest. But as she watched Dante disappear behind the heavy front door of his immaculate home, she couldn't ignore the truth. Dante Romano wasn't just a neighbor. He was a storm waiting on the horizon, and she had no idea how close it would come to her doorstep. The afternoon sun spilled over the neighborhood, chasing away the morning's gray drizzle. Elena was unpacking boxes in the living room, humming softly to herself as she tried to make the space feel like home. From outside, the sound of Luca's laughter drifted in, light and carefree. She smiled. That laugh was the reason she'd uprooted everything. But when she glanced through the window, her smile faltered. Luca wasn't alone. Across the yard, in the shadow of the wrought iron fence, Luca was crouched beside a massive German shepherd, petting its fur as if it were the friendliest creature in the world. And standing just a few feet away, watching with arms folded, was Dante Romano. Elena's pulse jumped. She hurried outside. "Luca?" she called, her voice sharper than she intended. "What did I say about wandering off?" The boy looked up, confusion clouding his wide brown eyes. "But Mom, he let me pet his dog. His name's Caesar. He's so cool." The dog's ears perked at the sound of his name, tail wagging as if Luca had already won him over. Elena's gaze flicked to Dante. He was leaning casually against the fence, sleeves rolled to the elbow. the faint ink of tattoos peeking along his forearm. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes never left hers. "He's harmless," Dante said, nodding toward the dog. "At least when he wants to be." Elena crossed her arms. "That's not the point, Luca," inside. "Now." Luca pouted, looking between her and Dante. "But Mom." "No, Luca." Her tone left no room for argument. With a defeated sigh, the boy shuffled toward the porch, glancing back at Caesar longingly before disappearing inside. Elena exhaled, turning to face Dante. "I don't appreciate my son bothering you." His brow arched slightly, as though her words amused him. "He wasn't bothering me." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "Still, I'd prefer if you didn't encourage him." Something flickered in his gaze then. Not offense, not anger, but something harder to place. He stepped closer to the fence, the late sun catching in his dark hair. "You're protective," he said softly. "That's good. But don't punish him for being a kid." Elena's heart gave an involuntary skip. His voice carried weight, authority, like every word was carved from stone. She hated the way it unsettled her. "I'm not punishing him," she said tightly. "I just don't want him around things I don't understand." The corner of his mouth curved, a half smile that was anything but reassuring. "You'll understand. Eventually." Her chest tightened. "I'm not sure I want to." For a moment, silence stretched between them. The only sound was Caesar's steady panting, tail thumping against the grass. Dante's gaze held hers unflinching, until she finally looked away. "Good night, Mr. Romano," she said curtly, turning back toward the house. As she reached the steps, Luca peeked from the window, his little hands pressed against the glass. His eyes sparkled with the kind of wonder only a child could hold. "Mom," he whispered when she came inside, "is not scary. He's different." Elena swallowed hard, pulling him into a hug. "That's exactly why you need to stay away, Luca. Different can be dangerous." But even as she said it, her mind replayed the look in Dante's eyes. How they had softened when he spoke to Luca, how for just a second. The ruthless exterior seemed to crack. Across the street, Dante stood in his yard long after the sun dipped below the horizon. Caesar sat at his side, ears alert. "You like the kid, huh?" Dante muttered, scratching behind the dog's ears. Caesar wagged his tail. Dante exhaled a slow breath, his thoughts heavy. "So do I," he admitted silently. But he knew what men like him brought to families. Darkness, fear, blood, and for the first time in years, he wondered if he could keep that darkness from touching the boy next door. The hum of the cicadas filled the late evening air as Elena carried a bag of groceries from her car. The porch light flickered above her, barely pushing back the shadows that pooled across the quiet street. She checked her watch. Luca was inside, finishing his homework at the kitchen table. She'd promised him spaghetti tonight. Something normal, something steady. But normal never seemed to last. As she bent to pick up the second grocery bag, a voice slurred from behind her. "Need some help with that, sweetheart?" Elena stiffened, glancing over her shoulder. Two men lingered near the curb, strangers she hadn't seen before. Their clothes were rumpled, their eyes glassy from drink. Or something stronger. "No. Thank you," she said quickly, clutching the bag tighter. One of them stepped closer, his grin crooked and unsettling. "Pretty little thing like you shouldn't be carrying bags alone." "Dangerous out here at night." Her pulse spiked. She shifted toward the porch, calculating the few feet to safety. "I said I'm fine." The second man chuckled, moving to block her path. "Don't be rude, darling. We're just being friendly." Elena's throat went dry. Every instinct screamed to get inside, to get to Luca. And then the atmosphere changed. A shadow detached itself from the darkness across the street. Heavy footsteps cut through the stillness. The men's laughter faltered as they turned. Dante Romano emerged. He wasn't in a suit tonight. Just dark slacks and a black shirt, sleeves rolled neatly to the elbows. But the authority in his stride was unmistakable. Caesar padded silently at his side, hackles bristling. "Is there a problem here?" Dante's voice was calm, almost casual, but it carried a weight that made Elena's skin prickle. The first man straightened, forcing bravado. "We were just talking. No harm." Dante's gaze slid over them, cold and sharp, before landing briefly on Elena. "Go inside," he murmured. It wasn't a request. Elena hesitated, clutching the groceries. Her pride screamed not to obey. But Luca's face flashed in her mind. She swallowed hard, nodding once before stepping onto the porch. From behind the screen door, she clutched the frame. Unable to look away, Dante turned back to the men, his expression hardened. You don't belong here. One of them sneered. Who the hell do you think you are? Her husband. And Dante's lips curved in the faintest smile, one that sent ice through Elena's veins. No, worse. The next seconds blurred. A hand shot out, grabbing the man by the collar. Dante slammed him against the hood of a car with bone, rattling force. Caesar growled low, teeth bared. The second man stumbled backward, cursing, but froze when Dante's eyes snapped to him. You listen to me, Dante said, his tone low and lethal. This street is mine. She is under my protection. You ever come back here, ever breathe in her direction, I will make sure you leave in pieces. Do you understand? The man beneath his grip nodded frantically. Choking for air, Dante released him with a shove. Both men staggered, scrambling into the night without another word. Their footsteps faded into silence, leaving only the sound of Caesar's growl tapering off. Elena's heart pounded as Dante turned, his gaze finding hers through the screen door. His expression softened, but only slightly. You shouldn't be out here alone, he said quietly. Her voice shook as she forced words out. You didn't have to do that. He stepped closer, the porch light catching the steel in his eyes. Yes, I did. For a moment, they stood there, the air between them charged. Elena's gratitude tangled with fear, twisting in her chest. She wanted to thank him, but the image of his hand on that man's throat, the ease with which violence rolled off him, it lodged in her mind like a warning. Finally, Dante broke the silence. Lock your door, he whistled softly. Caesar obeyed, patting at his side as Dante disappeared back into the shadows from which he came. Elena closed the door slowly, her hands trembling. Upstairs, she found Luca waiting at the window, peeking through the blinds. Mom, he whispered, eyes wide. Mr. Romano scared those guys away. He's like a superhero. Elena knelt beside him, brushing a hand through his hair. No, Luca. He's not a superhero. Her voice faltered as she glanced back toward the dark street. He's something else entirely. For 2 days, Elena couldn't shake the image of Dante's hand, crushing that man against the car. The memory lived in her mind, like a bruise, the cold steel in his eyes, the quiet certainty that he could end a life without hesitation. Yet, every time she looked out her window, there he was. Calm, untouched, as if nothing had happened. The street was different too. She noticed how people crossed to the other side when Dante's black cars pulled into the driveway, how neighbors' voices lowered whenever he passed, how respect and fear seemed to orbit him like a shadow. And the whispers. She heard them in the grocery store, in hushed conversations outside the school gates when she dropped Luca off. Romano, dangerous. Stay clear. But no one ever said exactly what he was. That night, curiosity got the better of her. After putting Luca to bed, Elena lingered on the porch, sipping tea, trying to enjoy the quiet. Across the cul-de-sac, Dante's house glowed faintly with golden light. A low murmur of voices drifted through the open windows, carried by the night breeze. She wasn't trying to eavesdrop. At least, that's what she told herself. But when the words cut through the silence, her blood ran cold. The shipment's secure, boss. But the Albano crew is sniffing around again. Want me to take care of it? Elena froze. Boss. Her hands tightened around the teacup, heart pounding. Another voice, smooth, commanding, one she knew too well. Dante? No, not yet. Let them sniff. They cross the line, we bury them. Quietly. Her stomach lurched. The conversation went on. Talk of ports, shipments, territory, debts. Words that painted a picture she didn't want to see but couldn't ignore. Dante Romano wasn't just a man with a temper. He wasn't just a neighbor with intimidating friends. He was something far worse. Elena's hand trembled, nearly spilling the tea. She backed into her house, locking the door behind her. Her chest rose and fell in sharp breaths. You knew he was dangerous, she told herself. But this, she pressed her forehead against the cool wood of the door. Every instinct screamed at her to pack up, take Luca, and run. But run where? And from what? A man like Dante, could he even be escaped? The next morning, she tried to push the knowledge down, focusing on Luca's breakfast, on the mountain of unpacked boxes, on the stack of bills waiting on the counter. Normal things, safe things. But normal shattered when a knock came at the door. When she opened it, Dante stood there, immaculate as always, his presence filling the doorway. "Morning," he said casually, as if last night's chilling words hadn't left her reeling. He held out a paper bag. "Brought these. Fresh pastries. Thought the kid might like them." Elena's pulse skipped. She stared at the bag, then at him, struggling to keep her voice even. "Why?" His eyes narrowed slightly, reading the suspicion in her tone. For a moment, she thought he'd press the point, but instead he gave a faint shrug. "Because I felt like it." Luca barreled into the room, breaking the tension. "Mr. Romano," he beamed, grabbing the bag. "Thanks," he peeked inside. "Mom, they've got chocolate ones." Dante's gaze softened at the boy's excitement. But when his eyes flicked back to Elena, the softness vanished, replaced by something sharper. Something that told her he could sense the shift in her. "You don't trust me," he said quietly. Elena's breath caught. She wanted to deny it, to brush it off, but the truth lodged in her throat like a stone. Dante studied her for a long moment before leaning in just enough for only her to hear. "Smart, don't trust anyone. Not even me." And with that, he stepped back, letting Luca chatter about pastries as he walked away, leaving Elena shaken in his wake. She closed the door, pressing her back against it, pastries still in her son's hands. Now there was no denying it. Dante Romano wasn't just dangerous. He was the danger. Elena swore she wouldn't open the door when Dante came knocking again. She swore she'd keep her distance, for Luca's sake. But when the invitation came, it wasn't for her. It was for Luca. "Caesar misses his new friend," Dante said simply, standing on her porch with his hands tucked into the pockets of his dark jacket. "Come over for dinner. Both of you." Oh, Elena hesitated, every alarm bell ringing in her head. "That's not necessary." From behind her, Luca's hopeful voice chimed in. "Please, Mom, please. He has Caesar, and last time he gave us pastries." Dante's gaze never left hers, calm, patient, dangerous. "It's just dinner," he murmured, as if he could read her hesitation. "Nothing more." And against her better judgment, she agreed. That evening, she and Luca crossed the street, the sight of Dante's home sending a shiver down her spine. Up close, the house was even more intimidating. Stone walls, gleaming windows, iron lanterns glowing at the gate. It looked less like a home and more like a fortress. Inside, the air carried the faint scent of expensive cigars and polished wood. Chandeliers cast warm golden light over the high ceilings. Luca's eyes widened with awe as Caesar bounded up to greet him, nearly knocking him off his feet. "This place is huge," Luca whispered. Dante smirked faintly. "It does the job." Elena glanced around, her eyes catching on the details: a grand piano in the corner, shelves lined with leather-bound books, and paintings that looked older than she was. But there were no family photos, no trace of warmth beyond wealth. The dining table was set with meticulous precision. Crystal glasses, silver cutlery, candles burning low. Dante himself poured wine for Elena, water for Luca. His every movement was smooth, controlled, like a man who lived his life on display. They ate pasta and fresh bread, far better than anything Elena had cooked in weeks. Luca chatted happily, talking about school and superheroes, his innocence filling the space. Dante listened intently, even chuckled once or twice, a sound that startled Elena as much as it warmed her. But beneath the glow of the candles, Elena couldn't shake the unease. The way the men in suits lingered outside the dining room door. The way Dante's phone buzzed twice, and he silenced it without even looking, his attention fixed solely on her. When Luca excused himself to play with Caesar in the yard, the air between them shifted. "You've been avoiding me?" Dante said, his voice low. Elena set down her glass carefully. "I've been busy." His eyes glinted with amusement. "Busy convincing yourself to be afraid of me," she bristled. "Shouldn't I be?" For a moment, silence stretched. Then Dante leaned back, studying her with unnerving calm. "Most people are, and they should be. But you," his gaze softened, just slightly. "You look at me differently." Her throat tightened. "Because I don't know what you want." The faintest smile curved his lips. Maybe I don't either. Elena's breath caught, heat crawling up her neck. She hated how easily he disarmed her, how his voice seeped past her defenses. She wanted to throw her glass in his face, to demand he leave them alone. Yet part of her, a part she didn't want to acknowledge, felt drawn to the shadow he carried. "You're dangerous," she whispered, as if saying it aloud could make it less true. Dante leaned forward, his eyes locking onto hers, voice dropping to a murmur meant only for her. "Yes. But not to you." The weight of his words pressed against her chest, terrifying and magnetic all at once. Before she could reply, Luca's laughter rang from the yard, breaking the spell. Dante leaned back, as if nothing had passed between them, his expression unreadable once again. Elena forced a steady breath, but she knew the truth. She hadn't just had dinner with her neighbor. She had sat across from the devil himself, and part of her was afraid she'd go back for seconds. The night after dinner at Dante's house, Elena lay awake long after Luca had fallen asleep. The taste of fine wine lingered on her tongue, but it was his words that burned through her. "Yes. But not to you." She turned over in bed, pulling the blanket tighter. She shouldn't have gone. She shouldn't have let Luca play with Caesar. Shouldn't have listened to Dante's low voice curling around her like smoke. She shouldn't want more. But when morning came, there he was again. Elena was hauling a trash bag to the curb when Dante appeared, dressed not in a suit today, but in a simple dark sweater and slacks. Even stripped of armor, he radiated the same commanding presence. "Need help?" he asked. "I can manage," Elena said quickly, brushing hair from her face. But he was already taking the bag from her, setting it down at the curb with effortless ease. "You don't always have to do everything alone," he said, his gaze steady. Her jaw tightened. "I've had to." Something flickered in his eyes. Understanding, maybe even admiration. "Then you're stronger than most." The word slipped past her defenses, settling deep. She hated that they did. Luca's voice rang out from the porch. "Mom! Romano, can Caesar come to the park with us today?" Elena opened her mouth to protest, but Dante beat her to it, his lips curving in that dangerous half-smile. "If your mother agrees." By the time she could object, Luca was already bouncing with excitement. "Please, Mom. Please." Elena sighed, pinching the bridge of her nose. "Fine. But just for an hour." The park was quiet, the late afternoon sun spilling gold across the grass. Luca chased Caesar with shrieks of laughter, his joy so pure it made Elena's chest ache. Dante stood beside her, hands in his pockets, watching. "He's good for the dog. Caesar doesn't trust many people." Elena glanced at him. "He seems to trust Luca. And you?" Dante said, his voice low. She looked away, pulse quickening. "That doesn't mean I trust you." He smirked faintly. "You don't have to. Trust takes time." She turned back to Luca, refusing to answer. But she felt his gaze on her, heavy and unrelenting, as if he were peeling back every layer she tried to hide behind. As the sun dipped lower, Luca begged for 5 more minutes, giving Dante and Elena a moment alone on the park bench. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was charged, alive, pulling tighter with each breath. Finally, Dante spoke. "I scare you." Elena swallowed hard. "Yes, and yet." He leaned closer, his voice a murmur meant only for her. "You're still here." Her heart pounded. Because of Luca. Because lips curved, but his eyes were serious. "Eyes it." She opened her mouth to protest, but the words tangled on her tongue. The space between them seemed to shrink on its own, drawn by something neither of them wanted to name. For a suspended heartbeat, she could feel the warmth of his breath, the weight of his presence wrapping around her like a storm. Then it happened. Dante's hand brushed hers, deliberate, testing, and before she could pull away, he leaned in. His lips caught hers in a kiss that was both soft and searing, restrained yet dangerous, like fire under glass. Elena froze, torn between every reason to run and the undeniable pull anchoring her to him. Her breath hitched, her chest aching with something she hadn't felt in years. When he finally pulled back, his eyes burned into hers. "That's the problem with lines," he whispered. "They were made to be crossed." Luca's voice shattered the moment. "Mom, did you see that? Caesar caught the ball." Elena jerked back, her face flushed. her heart hammering. She stood quickly, forcing a smile for her son. But inside, she was trembling. Because in one reckless kiss, she had crossed into a world she wasn't sure she could ever leave. And Dante knew it. The kiss haunted Elena. She told herself it was a mistake, a moment of weakness she would never repeat. Yet, every time she caught sight of Dante, watering his roses in the early morning, smoking quietly on his porch at night, her lips burned with the memory. Worse, she knew he hadn't forgotten either. But guilt wasn't the only thing keeping her awake at night. Something had shifted in the air. A tension she couldn't name. It clung to the street like a storm cloud no one wanted to acknowledge. It started with the cars. Unfamiliar sedans parked at odd hours along the curb. Engines idled too long. Windows tinted too dark. At first, Elena thought she was imagining it. But when she walked Luca home from school, she caught sight of the same black car circling the block twice, its headlights sweeping slow and deliberate. Her chest tightened. She grabbed Luca's hand tighter, forcing a smile she didn't feel. "Let's go inside, honey." That night, as she tucked him into bed, Luca frowned. "Mom, why do people always look at Mr. Romano like they're scared of him?" Oh, Elena froze. "What do you mean?" "I heard kids at school talking. They said their dads call him the boss. And today, there was this man outside the playground. He kept watching us." Her blood ran cold. "What man?" Luca shrugged, already drifting to sleep. "He had a big scar. Caesar barked at him the other day too." The Elena kissed his forehead, but her heart raced long after he was asleep. The next afternoon, her fears were confirmed. She was unloading groceries when two men appeared at the end of the driveway. Not neighbors. Not friendly. Their suits were rumpled, their eyes sharp, and their attention fixed squarely on her. "Mrs. Russo." One asked, his voice too casual. Her grip on the grocery bag tightened. "Can I help you?" The taller one smiled thinly. "We just wanted to welcome you to the neighborhood. Make sure you feel safe here." Elena's stomach dropped. Every instinct screamed to get inside. She opened her mouth to respond. And then Dante's voice sliced through the air. "She feels safe enough." The men stiffened. Dante stepped out of the shadows like he'd been waiting all along, Caesar at his side, his presence swallowing the space. The thin smile vanished. One of the men inclined his head. "Mr. Romano." "Leave," Dante said flatly. Neither argued. They disappeared into the waiting car, tires squealing as they pulled away. Elena's heart thundered as she stared at him. Who were they? Dante's jaw clenched, his gaze following the car until it vanished. "Not your concern." Her voice sharpened. "They were on my driveway, Dante. That makes it my concern." For a moment, silence. Then he turned to her, eyes dark, voice low. "They're rivals. Men who would use anyone, anything, to get to me." Her stomach twisted. "So Luca and I are targets now. Because of you." His gaze softened, though his voice didn't. "Because of me, you're alive to ask that question." Her breath caught. He stepped closer, lowering his tone so only she could hear. "You and your boy are under my protection. No one touches you." The words should have reassured her, but instead they made her shiver. Protection meant ownership. Protection meant she was tethered to him, whether she wanted to be or not. And deep down, a part of her wasn't sure if she wanted to escape. That night, Elena watched from her window as Dante stood on his porch, phone pressed to his ear. His voice was too low to hear, but his stance was sharp, coiled, ready for war. Somewhere in the shadows beyond the street, enemies waited. And now, she and Luca were caught in the middle of a world she had sworn never to touch. But the most terrifying part wasn't the danger outside. It was the part of her that felt safer when Dante was near. The week after Dante confronted the strangers, Elena lived in a state of constant vigilance. Every sound outside, every shadow near her house made her jump. She checked the locks, kept Luca close, and tried to convince herself things would go back to normal. But normal was a lie. It started on a Thursday afternoon. The sun was dipping low when Elena picked Luca up from school. He chattered happily about a spelling test, swinging his backpack, oblivious to the tension threading through her. She didn't notice the black SUV parked across the street until it was too late. They were halfway down the block when the doors flew open. Two men in masks spilled out, moving fast. Mom, Luca cried, startled. Run, Elena screamed, shoving him toward the sidewalk. But they were faster. One man grabbed her arm, yanking her back with bruising force, while the other lunged for Luca. Elena fought like hell, clawing, kicking, her scream tearing through the quiet street. Let him go! Let go. Luca's shrill cry pierced her heart as the masked man dragged him toward the SUV. Mom, help! Adrenaline surged. Elena wrenched free, throwing herself at the man clutching her son. She tore at his mask, scratching his face beneath, desperate, wild. He shoved her hard. She hit the pavement, pain exploding through her shoulder. Mom, Luca sobbed, his small hands reaching for her as the men forced him inside the SUV. Tires screeched. The vehicle lurched forward. Elena stumbled to her feet, running after it, screaming until her throat burned. Luca! The SUV vanished around the corner, leaving her collapsed in the street, gasping, trembling, her son's cries echoing in her ears. She barely remembered dialing, barely heard her own broken voice into the phone. But minutes later, Dante was there. He arrived like a storm, his car skidding to a halt, his men spilling out behind him. The moment he saw Elena, crumpled and bloodied on the pavement, his expression darkened into something terrifying. What happened? His voice was low, sharp, lethal. Elena choked on sobs. They took him. They took Luca. The world seemed to freeze. Dante knelt, gripping her shoulders, his eyes blazing with fury and something else. Fear. Real fear. Who? He demanded. I don't know. Masks. Black SUV. She shook her head frantically, tears streaking down her cheeks. They took my baby Dante. They took him. For the first time since she'd met him, Dante's control cracked. He stood, barking orders to his men, his voice cutting through the night like a blade. Find them. Every car, every face, every contact. Now. He turned back to her, cupping her face with unexpected gentleness. Listen to me, I will get him back. Do you understand? Nothing will happen to your son. But Elena saw it in his eyes. The shadow of a promise he couldn't fully control. Her chest heaved, her hands trembled. Why Dante? Why him? His jaw tightened. Because of me. And in that moment, Elena understood the full weight of what being close to Dante Romano meant. Her son was in the hands of his enemies, and only the devil himself could bring him back. The night stretched long and merciless, each second a sharpened blade carving into Elena's chest. Luca's absence was a void she couldn't breathe through. Dante hadn't left her side. Not once. She sat in his living room now, trembling, hands still smeared with dirt and blood from the pavement. Around them, his men moved with silent precision, phones pressed to ears, guns checked, engines revving outside. The Romano house had transformed into a war room. Elena felt like she had stepped into a nightmare, and Dante was its center. No longer calm, no longer charming. He was pure steel, fury forged into flesh. He stood at the head of the room, phone to his ear, his tone low and lethal. You tell Albano this. He touched something that belongs to me. He wants a war. I'll drown him in his own blood. Elena's breath caught at the word belongs. But this wasn't the moment to argue. When he hung up, he turned to her. We found them. A warehouse by the docks. Her heart lurched. Then what are we waiting for? Let's go. Dante's jaw tightened. You're not coming. The hell I'm not. Her voice cracked with fury and terror. That's my son. For a heartbeat, silence. Then, with a low curse, Dante grabbed her arm. His eyes locked onto hers, dark and burning. Elena, if you come you'll see things you can't forget. Things you'll hate me for. I already know who you are, she whispered, tears brimming. But Luca needs me. I'm not staying behind. Something in her defiance struck him. At last, he nodded once. Stay close to me. Don't move unless I tell you. The docks were a graveyard of shadows. Rusted cranes loomed like skeletons, the stink of salt water and oil thick in the air. The warehouse was lit from within, faint yellow spilling through grimy windows. 2 black SUVs sat outside, armed guards pacing like restless wolves. Dante's men spread into the darkness, silent and lethal. Dante moved forward with Elena at his side, his hand brushing hers just long enough to remind her, stay behind me. The first shot cracked through the night. Chaos erupted. Gunfire lit the docks in sharp flashes. Men shouted, boots pounded against concrete. Elena ducked behind a crate, her heart hammering as bullets sparked against steel. Dante didn't flinch. He moved like death itself, precise and merciless, his gun barking with each step. One guard dropped, then another, his men covering him in a deadly formation. "Elena!" he barked, dragging her forward between bursts of gunfire. Inside, now. They crashed through the warehouse doors, the sound of fighting behind them. The air inside reeked of gasoline and dust. Crates towered like walls, shadows stretching long. And then, "Mom!" The cry pierced through everything. "Luca!" Elena's heart surged. She spotted him tied to a chair near the far wall, a gag in his mouth, tears streaking his face. She bolted forward, but Dante's arm shot out, yanking her back just as a man stepped from the shadows, pressing a gun to Luca's head. "Not another step," the man hissed. His scarred face twisted in a cruel smile. Elena froze, her blood turning to ice. Dante's entire body went still, his gun aimed steady at the man's chest. His voice dropped to a deadly calm. "Albano." The rival boss sneered. "You think you can control this city, Romano? You take what you want, bleed us dry, and expect no one to challenge you. This boy," he jerked the gun closer to Luca's temple, making Elena sob, "is the price of your arrogance." "Please," Elena whispered, her knees weak. "He's just a child. He's innocent." Albano's eyes flicked to her, amused. "And you must be the reason Romano's suddenly gone soft. A woman and her brat. Touching." Dante's voice hardened to steel. "You let him go, and maybe you live long enough to regret breathing." Albano laughed, cruel and sharp. "Or maybe I paint the walls with your little weakness right here and now." The moment stretched razor thin. Then Dante moved. It was a blur. Gunfire, shouting, Elena's scream. Dante lunged sideways, his bullet ripping through Albano's arm, sending the gun clattering. Luca cried out as Dante closed the distance, slamming Albano against the crates with brutal force. The two men fought savagely, fists in fury, until Dante drove a knife from his belt into Albano's shoulder. The rival boss crumpled, howling in pain. Dante didn't hesitate. He pressed his gun to Albano's temple, his eyes black with vengeance. "Blood for blood," he growled. "Dante, no." Elena's voice broke, desperate. She grabbed his arm, her hands shaking. "Please, don't do it. Not in front of Luca." For a heartbeat, Dante didn't move. His chest heaved, sweat dripping, rage burning hotter than anything she'd ever seen. Then, slowly, he lowered the gun. His men swarmed in, dragging Albano away, his screams echoing through the warehouse. Elena rushed to Luca, tearing the ropes free, pulling him into her arms. He sobbed against her shoulder, clinging tight. She held him, tears streaming, whispering over and over, "I've got you. I've got you." Dante stood behind them, silent. Blood smeared his shirt, his hands, his face. He looked like a monster carved from shadow. And yet, when Elena lifted her gaze to him, she realized the most terrifying part of all. She wasn't afraid of him. She was afraid of how safe she felt with him there. The drive back from the docks was a blur. Elena sat in the back seat with Luca pressed against her chest, his small hands clutching her shirt, as though letting go would mean losing her forever. She rocked him gently, whispering reassurances she wasn't sure she believed herself. Across from them, Dante sat in silence. Blood streaked his face and hands, his dark shirt soaked through. But his eyes, those merciless, burning eyes, remained fixed on the road ahead. No one spoke. The only sound was Luca's uneven breathing. At the house, Dante's men melted into the night, engines rumbling as they sped off to finish what he'd started at the docks. The street was quiet again, eerily normal, as if the war Elena had just witnessed hadn't spilled blood into its shadows. Inside her home, Elena carried Luca to bed. He refused to let go until she promised she would stay right beside him. Exhaustion claimed him quickly, his tear-stained cheeks finally softening into sleep. When she slipped out of his room, Dante was waiting in the hallway. He looked too large for the small space, his presence crowding the air. His shirt was torn, his knuckles raw, his expression unreadable. "You saved him," she whispered, her voice breaking. His jaw tightened. "I promised I would." Tears welled in her eyes. Relief, gratitude, fury, fear, all of it tangled until she could barely breathe. "But they took him because of you, Dante! Because of who you are!" His eyes darkened, but he didn't flinch. "Yes." That single word cut her deeper than any denial would have. She pushed past him, pacing the small living room, her hands trembling. Do you have any idea what that felt like? Watching them drag my son away. Hearing him scream for me while I couldn't stop it. Her voice cracked into a sob. I can't live like this. He can't live like this. Dante stood in the doorway, silent, his shadow stretching across the room. I should take Luca and leave, she whispered, more to herself than him. Find somewhere far away, somewhere safe. Finally, Dante spoke, his voice low, dangerous in its calm. There's nowhere safe, Elena. Not anymore. If you run, they'll find you. Albano isn't finished. Men like him don't stop until they're buried. Her stomach nodded. So what then? I just accept this. Accept that my son is a pawn in your war. The Dante stepped closer, his eyes locked onto hers, fierce and unyielding. Your son is not a pawn. He is under my protection now. No one touches him again. She shook her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. You don't get it. Protection isn't enough. I don't want him to grow up in fear. Looking over his shoulder every day, watching men with guns outside the door. Dante's expression faltered, just for a moment. His gaze softened, almost human, as though her words struck something buried deep. Elena, he said quietly, I don't want him to grow up like me either. Her breath caught. For the first time, she saw not the monster, not the Mafia boss, but the man beneath. A man who carried his own ghosts, who had been shaped by blood and power and choices he could never take back. The silence between them was heavy, charged with everything unspoken. Finally, Dante stepped back, his control snapping back into place. Get some rest. I'll have men outside tonight. She wanted to scream at him, to demand answers, to tell him to stay away. But instead, she sank onto the couch, exhausted, broken, her face buried in her hands. And when she finally lifted her head, Dante was gone, swallowed by the night, like the shadow he was. The days after Luca's kidnapping blurred together, but the fear never left. Elena found herself jumping at every sound. The slam of a car door, footsteps on the street, even Caesar's sudden bark outside. She told herself she was holding it together for Luca's sake, but inside, she was unraveling. Yet through it all, Dante was there. Not always in sight, but always present. His men lingered outside her house at all hours, silent sentinels. His black car appeared at the school pickup line, ensuring no one came near. And some nights, when she peeked through her curtains, she saw him standing across the street, cigarette glowing faintly in the dark, watching. It should have unnerved her. Instead, it felt like the only reason she could sleep at all. One evening, after Luca had gone to bed, Elena found herself on her porch with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. She hadn't meant to wait for him, but when Dante crossed the street toward her, it felt inevitable. You shouldn't be out here alone, he said quietly. She forced a small smile. Something tells me I'm not really alone. His gaze flicked to the dark SUVs stationed at either end of the block, then back to her. No, you're not. For a while, silence stretched between them, filled only by the chirp of crickets and the distant hum of the city. Finally, Elena spoke. When they took Luca, I thought I'd lost everything. And the only reason he's alive is because of you. Her voice cracked. So thank you. Dante's expression softened, just slightly. You don't need to thank me. I'd do it again. Every time, her heart clenched. Gratitude, yes, but also confusion. Because she couldn't stop asking herself the same question, why me? Why us? Why are you doing this? She asked, her voice trembling. Why put yourself between us and men who want you dead? You barely know me. The Dante's eyes held hers, dark and unreadable. Then he said, simply, because you remind me what it feels like to want more than this life. The words hit her like a blow. Her breath caught, her pulse stuttering. For a moment, she saw him not as the untouchable boss, not as the devil everyone whispered about, but as a man standing at the edge of two worlds, daring to hope for something he was never meant to have. Dante, she whispered, but her voice failed. He stepped closer, so close she could feel the heat radiating from him. His hand brushed her cheek, gentle where his life had taught him to be brutal. You scare me, she admitted, her throat tight. His lips curved faintly. Good. Then you'll never forget what I am. Her breath trembled. And if I can't forget, what else you are? The air between them burned. For a heartbeat, it felt like he might kiss her again. Like the tension that had been building since the first moment they met would finally break. But then Caesar barked from the yard, and Dante pulled back, his eyes hardening once more. This isn't safe, he murmured, more to himself than her. And it won't be until Albano is dealt with. Her chest tightened. And then, he didn't answer. Instead, he turned away, his shadow stretching long across the porch as he disappeared into the night. Alina stood frozen. Her hand pressed to her cheek where his touch lingered. She knew the danger wasn't over. She knew she should protect her heart as fiercely as she protected Luca. But it was already too late. She was bound to him now. By fire, by fear, by something deeper she couldn't name. Elena woke to the sound of breaking glass. For a moment, she thought it was a dream, just the echo of her own restless fears. But then Caesar's furious barking tore through the night, and Luca's frightened cry followed. "Mum." Her heart slammed into her ribs. She rushed into his room, pulling him from the bed just as another window shattered. Shards glittered on the floor like ice. A Molotov cocktail hissed and flared in the hallway, flames licking up the walls. "Stay behind me, Luca," she cried, clutching him close. The house was under attack. Outside, engines roared. Shadows moved along the street, figures with guns flashing in the dark. The men stationed outside, Dante's men, were already firing back. The sharp crack of gunshots mixing with the roar of fire. Elena's mind spun. There was no way out, no escape. Then the front door burst open. "Elena?" It was Dante. He moved through the smoke like a storm, gun in hand, eyes blazing. One of his men kicked the flaming bottle aside, while another dragged a wounded guard toward cover. Dante reached them in seconds, pulling Elena and Luca into his arms, shielding them with his own body. "Are you hurt?" Elena shook her head, choking on smoke. "The fire. I've got you." His voice was a promise and a command all at once. He swept Luca into one arm, grabbing Elena's hand with the other, dragging them through the chaos. Bullets slammed into the walls, glass shattered underfoot, men shouted in the night. Outside, the street was a war zone. Albano's men poured from black vans, firing wildly, shouting curses. Dante's soldiers met them with brutal precision. Neighbors' lights flicked on. Screams carried into the night, but no one dared step outside. Dante shoved Elena and Luca behind a parked SUV, crouching low. "Stay here. Don't move until I say." "Don't you dare leave us?" Elena begged, clutching his arm. Her eyes burned with fear, tears cutting through the suit on her face. He caught her gaze, and for a flicker of a moment, the hardened boss was gone, replaced by the man who had whispered his darkest truth on her porch. "I'll never leave you," he swore. Then he was gone, vanishing into the smoke and gunfire. Elena pulled Luca into her lap, shielding his head. Whispering nonsense, anything to keep him from hearing the screams and gunshots. Her heart thundered. Every second felt like it could be the last. She dared a glance over the SUV. Dante was a force of nature. He moved with lethal grace, cutting through Albano's men like a wolf among sheep. Every shot was precise, every movement calculated, his rage controlled but unstoppable. And then, she saw him, Albano, standing at the far end of the street, barking orders, his scarred face twisted in fury. Their eyes met across the chaos. He pointed at Elena. Two of his men broke off, guns raised, charging straight toward her. Elena froze. Her body screamed to run, but there was nowhere to go, nothing to shield her except the car and her own arms wrapped tight around Luca. And then Dante was there. He came out of nowhere, slamming one man against the hood of the SUV with bone, crunching force. The other raised his gun, but Dante's shot split the night, dropping him before he could fire. Breathless, Elena clung to Luca, tears streaming. Dante grabbed her shoulders, scanning her for injuries, his chest heaving. "Are you hit?" She shook her head, trembling. No, we're fine." Another explosion ripped through the street as one of Albano's vans burst into flames. Sirens wailed in the distance. Police, fire trucks, too late for anything but ashes. Albano cursed, retreating into the shadows with the few men still standing. "This isn't over, Romano," his voice echoed. "You and your little family are dead." And then he was gone. The street lay in ruins. Cars riddled with bullet holes. Flames licking the night sky, neighbors peering through curtains with terrified eyes. Dante's men regrouped, tending to the wounded, dousing the fires, clearing evidence before the authorities arrived. But Elena only saw Luca trembling in her arms, and Dante, bloodied, bruised, standing like the last wall between them and oblivion. She met his eyes, her voice breaking. "This has to stop, Dante. I can't raise my son in a war zone." He stepped closer, his hand cupping the back of her head, his forehead brushing hers. His voice was raw, fierce, and low. "It won't stop until Albano is gone. But I swear to you, Elena, I'll burn the world to keep you both safe." Her heart twisted, because for the first time, she believed him. And that terrified her most of all. The house was gone. By the time firefighters finished their work, Elena's home was nothing but blackened walls and smoke curling into the night sky. Neighbors whispered behind drawn curtains, clutching their children, terrified of being noticed. Elena stood barefoot in the street, Luca clinging to her side, trembling. Her eyes stung from more than just the smoke. That was supposed to be their safe haven, their fresh start. Now it was ash. Dante's coat settled across her shoulders. She looked up to see him standing there, his face hard, his body still humming with battle. But his eyes, those dark, merciless eyes, softened just slightly when they met hers. "You're coming with me," he said. It wasn't a suggestion. Elena swallowed, clutching Luca tighter. "And if I say no," his jaw clenched, a muscle ticking. "Then I chain Albano's men to your doorstep and make you watch what he does to them. Until you understand, I'll never let you stand alone." Her breath caught. The words should have horrified her. Instead, some broken part of her felt safe. That night, Donnie took them to his estate, a sprawling, guarded mansion on the edge of the city. Luca's wide eyes darted everywhere: marble floors, glittering chandeliers, men in suits with weapons at their sides. Elena held his hand tightly, wishing she could shield him from all of it. Dante led them upstairs to a private wing. "These rooms are yours now. No one comes near without my permission." Luca clutched his mother's leg, whispering, "Mom, I'm scared." Elena knelt, kissing his forehead. "I know, baby. But we're together. And that's what matters." When Luca finally fell asleep in the oversized bed, curled into her arms, Elena slipped out into the hallway. Dante was waiting there, leaning against the wall like a shadow. "You think this is an upgrade?" she asked bitterly. "A palace instead of a house." "He's still in danger." "We're still in danger." "I know," Dante admitted. "But here, I control the danger." She shook her head, her voice trembling. "You don't get it. Luca isn't just some possession you can lock away. He's a child. He deserves a childhood, not bodyguards and bullets." And Dante's gaze softened. "I never had one. I won't let Albano steal his too." The rawness in his voice struck her. For the first time, she saw the boy he must have been once, raised in shadows, taught violence before kindness. She stepped closer without meaning to. "Why us, Dante? You could have anyone. Why put yourself in our lives?" He studied her for a long moment, then reached out, his hand brushing her cheek. His touch was rough, calloused, but atchingly gentle. "Because when I look at you, Elena, I don't just see what I want. I see what I could have been." Her chest tightened, tears blurring her vision. The air between them crackled. She could feel his breath, smell the faint mix of smoke and leather clinging to him. "I'm dangerous," he whispered. "I'll destroy everything I touch." "Then don't destroy me," she whispered back. Their lips hovered, the moment burning between them. And for the first time, Dante allowed himself to close the distance. The kiss was slow, searing, full of everything they had held back for weeks. Pain, longing, fear, hunger. It all spilled into that single, stolen moment. When they finally broke apart, Elena's forehead rested against his, her breath unsteady. "You're a devil, Dante," she murmured, his lips curved faintly, dark and dangerous. "Then let me be your devil." Elena woke to silence. For the first time in days, there was no gunfire. No sirens, no glass breaking in the night. Only the muffled sound of guards outside the estate, the occasional bark of Caesar in the courtyard, and the slow rhythm of Luca's breathing beside her. But silence didn't bring peace. It brought awareness. Awareness of the kiss she and Dante had shared. Awareness of the way her heart betrayed her every time he entered the room. Awareness that she was falling, dangerously, helplessly, for the one man who could destroy her life as completely as Albano could. She slipped from the bed and wandered to the balcony. The sprawling gardens below were beautiful, almost dreamlike, but the men with rifles pacing the perimeter shattered the illusion. Do you always stare at cages like they're gardens? His voice was behind her, deep and smooth, startling her. She turned. Dante leaned against the doorway. Shirt unbuttoned at the collar, sleeves rolled up, his scars catching the dawn light. He looked tired, like a man who hadn't slept in days. But his eyes were sharp, fixed entirely on her. It's beautiful, she said quietly, but it's still a prison. His gaze darkened. A prison that keeps you alive. Elena wrapped her arms around herself. At what cost, Dante? Luca hasn't smiled in days. He barely speaks. He sleeps clutching my hand because he's terrified I'll vanish if he lets go. I wanted to give him a life filled with normal things. School plays, soccer games, birthday parties. Instead, I've given him this. Her voice cracked, and she turned away, ashamed of the tears that burned her eyes. Dante's footsteps crossed the floor. His hand rested lightly on her shoulder, steady, grounding. Albano did this. Not you. She shook her head. But you brought him closer. The silence stretched, heavy and unyielding. Finally, Dante's voice dropped to a whisper. You're right. Elena blinked, turning to face him. He rarely admitted fault. I can't change what I am, he continued, but I can change what happens next. Albino won't stop until I end him. Every day I wait, I put you both in more danger. That's a cost I won't pay. His eyes burned with the promise of violence, the kind that chilled her and yet, terrifyingly, made her feel safe. Elena's chest tightened. You're talking about killing him. Adana's hand slid from her shoulder to cup her face. I'm talking about protecting what's mine. Her breath trembled. She hated the way her body leaned into his touch, the way her lips parted despite the terror in her chest. You can't claim me like one of your soldiers, she whispered. No, Dante said, his thumb brushing her cheek. But I can fight like hell for you. The words lodged in her heart, equal parts weapon and vow. Later that morning, Elena watched from the balcony as Dante gathered his men in the courtyard. They moved with deadly efficiency, loading weapons, exchanging clipped words. Vehicles lined the drive like an army waiting for command. Albano's name was on every whispered breath. Elena wrapped the blanket tighter around her shoulders. Luca still asleep behind her. She knew what was coming. Blood, violence. A reckoning that could either free them or destroy everything. And as Dante barked orders below, his presence dominating every man around him, Elena realized the truth that terrified her mostly. She didn't just fear losing him. She feared what would happen if he didn't come back at all. The storm began before dawn. Elena stood in the vast kitchen of Dante's estate, staring at the untouched mug of coffee in her hands. The air smelled of gun oil and leather. The men had been preparing all night. Outside the tall windows, the courtyard was alive with motion. Black SUVs lined in rows, men loading weapons, speaking in low, urgent voices. And at the center of it all, Dante. He moved like a commander carved from stone, every word sharp, every gesture absolute. He didn't raise his voice, didn't need to. The men obeyed him with the kind of respect that was born not of loyalty alone, but of fear. Luca wandered in, rubbing his eyes, still in his pajamas. Mom, where's Dante? Elena forced a smile, brushing his hair back. He's busy, sweetheart. But Luca frowned, already wise beyond his years. Is he going to fight the bad man again? The coffee mug shook in her hands. Go eat your cereal, baby. Hours later, when Dante finally appeared, the house seemed to tilt around him. His shirt was black, his gun holstered at his side, his watch glinting in the early light. He looked every bit the man she knew he was, the Mafia king, the devil of the city. You're leaving. Her voice wasn't a question. He stepped closer, lowering his voice so Luca wouldn't hear. Albano's running out of places to hide. Tonight, I cut the head off the snake. Her chest tightened. And if you don't come back... Dante's gaze burned into hers. Then at least you'll be safe. My men will die before they let him touch you again. That's not enough, she snapped, her fear spilling over. I don't want safety if it means losing you. The words slipped out before she could stop them. Her eyes widened, her breath catching, but there was no taking them back. For a moment, Dante's expression cracked. His hand lifted, fingers brushing her cheek with a tenderness that didn't belong in a man like him. Then I'll come back, he whispered, and for the first time, it didn't sound like a threat, it sounded like a vow. He kissed her forehead, quick, fierce, final. And then he was gone, swallowed by the army waiting in his courtyard. That night, Dante's convoy tore through the city streets, a fleet of black shadows hunting one target. His men had tracked Albano to an old warehouse near the river, a fortress of rusted steel and broken glass. Dante sat in the lead SUV, a pistol resting in his hand, his jaw set. Every mile closer sharpened him. Stripped away the man Alina had seen on her balcony, leaving only the predator. Albano thinks he's safe, Dante murmured. He's forgotten what fear tastes like. He chambered around, his eyes glinting. I'll remind him. Back at the estate, Alina sat on Luca's bed, watching him sleep. The walls felt too quiet, too thick, like the house itself was holding its breath. Every sound outside, the crunch of gravel, the creak of the floor, made her heart lurch. She thought of Dante out there in the dark, hunting death as easily as other men hunted prey. She hated him for it. She needed him for it. She wanted him to come back, even if it meant living in this world of shadows forever. She pressed her lips to Luca's forehead, whispering a prayer she wasn't sure anyone would hear. Please bring him back to me. The warehouse doors exploded inward. Gunfire tore through the night. Dante moved like a phantom, his men storming the building, bullets sparking against steel beams. Albano's soldiers fought like cornered animals, but Dante's wrath was merciless, his aim unerring. And somewhere in the smoke and chaos, Albano waited. Dante could feel it. The hunt was almost over. The warehouse reeked of rust and oil, its broken windows rattling with the force of gunfire. Shadows danced across the walls as bullets sparked against steel beams. The night alive with death. Dante moved through it like he was born of violence. His pistol barked with precision, each shot dropping a man where he stood. He advanced without hesitation, his black shirt soaked with sweat and smoke, his eyes burning with a singular focus. Albino. Every step forward was a step deeper into hell, and Dante welcomed it. On the estate's balcony, Elena clutched the railing so tightly her knuckles whitened. She had refused to sleep, refused to rest, pacing the halls until the weight of silence crushed her. Now, every distant siren felt like a scream meant for her. Every shift of shadow beyond the gates made her heart lurch. In Luca's room, the boy slept fitfully, murmuring in his dreams. Elena stroked his hair, whispering promises she didn't know if she could keep. Your mom's here. Dante's out there. He'll come back. He has to. But the lie echoed too loud in her chest. Inside the warehouse, the battle reached a fever pitch. Albano's soldiers fell one after another, their lines thinning under the relentless precision of Dante's men. And then, finally, he saw him. Albino stood at the far end of the loading bay, scared face twisted in fury, an assault rifle in his hands. His voice cut through the chaos like poison. Ramanu. The world narrowed to the two of them. Tonight you die, Albino roared, opening fire. Dante dove behind a steel crate, bullets shredding the air where he had stood. Sparks rained down, the air thick with smoke and fire. He returned fire, each shot forcing Albino backward. The serpent hissed, the devil snarled. The duel had begun. Elena's phone buzzed on the nightstand. She snatched it up with trembling hands. Unknown number. Her heart stopped. She hesitated, then answered. Hello, static. Then a voice, low and venomous. You should have stayed away, pretty girl, Albino. Elena's blood froze. You and that bastard son of yours. Dante can't protect you forever. Her knees buckled, tears burning her eyes. She hung up, clutching the phone to her chest, her breath ragged. She couldn't tell if the call was live or a cruel trick. But she knew one thing. Albino's hate had her name carved into it, and if Dante lost tonight, they would be next. Back in the warehouse, Dante's pistol clicked empty. He tossed it aside, drawing the knife at his belt. Albano, bleeding from a graze along his arm, did the same, dropping his rifle for a blade gleaming in the dim light. They circled each other, predators in a cage. You took my brother from me, Albano spat, my empire, my name. Tonight, I take yours. Adante's lip curled into something between a snarl and a smile. Then take your shot, serpent. You won't live long enough to regret it. They clashed. Steel met steel, blades sparking, the fight raw and savage. Albano's strength was brutal, fueled by hatred, but Dante was precision, his strikes fueled by cold. Calculated rage. Blood spilled. Shouts echoed. The world shrank to the sound of their blades and their labored breathing. Albano slammed Dante against a steel pillar, his knife slicing across Dante's ribs. Dante grunted, pain flashing in his eyes, but he didn't falter. He twisted, driving his own blade deep into Albano's side. Albano roared, slashing wildly, but Dante caught his wrist, forcing the blade back, until it turned against him. The serpent's own steel sank into his chest. Albano's eyes went wide, shock freezing his face. No, this isn't. Dante's hand tightened on the hilt, his voice low and final. This was always how it ends. He wrenched the blade free, and Albano crumpled to the ground, lifeless. The serpent was dead. At the estate. Elena jolted awake on Luca's bed, tears on her cheeks, her heart pounding as if she had lived the battle herself. She didn't know why, but deep in her chest she felt it. Something had shifted. A war had ended, and she knew Dante was coming back. The warehouse was silent now. Smoke curled toward the broken rafters, bodies littered the floor. Dante stood among the wreckage, blood dripping from his side, his breath ragged. He stared down at Albano's corpse, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, he turned and walked out, leaving the serpent to rot in his own shadow. The devil had won. The heavy gates groaned open in the gray light of dawn. Elena stood at the top of the estate's steps, heart racing, her arms wrapped tight around herself. She hadn't slept. Every tick of the clock had been an eternity. All night she had paced the floors, checked Luca's breathing a dozen times, whispered prayers she never thought she'd utter. And then she saw him, Dante. He emerged from the convoy like a shadow given flesh, his black shirt torn and bloodied, his face smeared with dirt and smoke. Every inch of him screamed war, but his stride was steady, his head unbowed. He was alive. Elena's legs moved before her mind could catch up. She ran down the steps, her breath breaking, her vision blurring with tears. When she reached him, she didn't stop to think. She threw her arms around him, clinging like she'd never let go. Dante stiffened for only a heartbeat before his arms crushed her against him. His body was iron and fire, his scent gunpowder and leather. She could feel his heartbeat against her cheek, steady, unyielding. I thought, her voice cracked, I thought I'd lost you. You won't, Dante murmured, his lips brushing her hair. Not while I still breathe. Inside, the household was chaos. Men limped in with wounds, doctors were summoned in hushed voices. The estate buzzing like a hive after battle. But for Elena, the world had narrowed to the living room couch, where she sat with Dante, tending to the gash along his ribs. You should be lying down, she scolded softly, dabbing at the wound with trembling hands. He caught her wrist, stopping her. His eyes locked on hers, dark and unreadable. Don't cry for me, Elena. I don't deserve your tears. Her breath caught. Then what do you deserve? His lips curved, faint and bitter. Hell. And I've been living in it for years. She shook her head, her voice fierce despite the tears in her throat. Don't you see? You're more than that. You saved Luca. You saved me. She faltered, whispering. You're the only reason I'm still standing. For once, Dante didn't argue. He leaned forward, pressing his forehead to hers, his hand cupping the back of her neck. The moment was raw, fragile. Two broken souls finding something whole in each other. Upstairs, Luca peeked through the railing, watching. His eyes were wide, uncertain, but there was something new there to trust. For the first time since the night of the kidnapping, he didn't look afraid. Later, when the house finally quieted, Elena found Dante alone in his study. The firelight painted shadows across his face, highlighting the exhaustion etched deep into his features. She stepped inside softly. It's over, isn't it? Dante didn't look up from the glass of whiskey in his hand. Albano's dead. But you don't believe it's over. He finally lifted his gaze. Men like Albano don't live in a vacuum. He had allies. Enemies of mine who wanted him strong. Now they'll smell blood, and they'll come. Her stomach nodded. She had wanted peace. Instead, she saw the truth. Albano's death wasn't an ending. It was a signal flare. Still, when Dante stood and reached for her hand, she didn't pull away. "You're not safe," he said, his voice low. "Not with me. But if you stay," he hesitated, a rare uncertainty flickering in his eyes. "I'll burn every last one of them before I let them touch you." Elena's fingers tightened around his. Fear still churned in her chest, but so did something stronger, something dangerous. Hope. The estate was beautiful, but it didn't feel like home. Alina walked its endless halls in the mornings, Luca's small hand tucked into hers, sunlight spilling through tall windows onto marble floors. There were paintings older than her grandmother, chandeliers that sparkled like stars, gardens bursting with roses and fountains. To anyone else, it might have looked like a palace. To Elena, it was a fortress. Guards lined the perimeter at all hours. Men in dark suits moved through the corridors like shadows, whispering into radios, their eyes always scanning, searching. Even at breakfast, there was always someone near the door, armed, silent, a reminder that peace here was only an illusion. And yet, she couldn't deny the security it offered. For the first time in weeks, Luca laughed. It was a small sound, fragile as glass, but it was real. He chased Caesar across the lawn one afternoon, his giggles echoing off the stone walls. Elena sat on a bench beneath a sprawling oak tree, watching him, her heart aching with relief and guilt all at once. Because she knew this safety came with a price. That evening, Dante found her in the garden. He wore his usual black jacket draped over his shoulders, the weight of command in every step. His eyes softened slightly when they landed on Luca. "He's adjusting," Dante said. Elena nodded, folding her arms. "Children are resilient. But how long until he realizes this isn't normal? That men with guns outside the windows don't guard other kids' backyards?" Dante lowered himself onto the bench beside her. "You want him to live in a world that doesn't exist for people like us." Her gaze snapped to his. Something flickered in his expression. Dangerous. Vulnerable, both at once. "You're mine now, Elena. Whether you want it or not, you're part of my world." Her breath caught. The words should have made her recoil, but instead, they settled inside her like a truth she had already known. "I didn't ask for this," she whispered. "No." His hand brushed hers, rough and warm. "But I'll make sure you survive it." That night, after Luca was asleep, Elena wandered into Dante's study. The room was dim, lit only by the fire in the hearth. Papers were scattered across his desk, maps of the city, names written in Dante's sharp hand, lists of allies and enemies. She skimmed a few lines, her stomach tightening at the cold precision of it all. This was the heart of his empire, a world built on strategy, violence, and blood. And she was standing in the middle of it. Curious. She turned to see Dante leaning in the doorway, his presence filling the room. Trying to understand, she admitted softly. He crossed the space between them, his steps unhurried, deliberate. Understanding comes with a cost. Her eyes held his. "Then teach me. If I'm in this world, I need to know what it means. For Luca. For me." For a moment, Dante only stared at her, as if weighing the danger of giving her what she asked. Then his lips curved into a faint, dark smile. "Careful, Elena. Once you see it, you can't unsee it." But he led her to the desk, his hand resting lightly on the small of her back. And for the first time, Elena didn't feel like a guest in his house. She felt like she was stepping into something more. A role she had never wanted, but one she would have to own. The world of the devil. Elena woke before dawn. The estate was quiet, the silence thick with the presence of men on watch. She padded barefoot down the hall, pausing outside Dante's study. Through the door, she heard the low rumble of his voice, sharp and commanding, speaking to his lieutenants. "Albano's gone, but his death leaves a hole. Holes don't stay empty for long. Someone will try to fill it. I want names. I want them yesterday." A pause. "Then, no one touches this house. Not while I breathe." The authority in his tone made Elena shiver. He wasn't just a man here, he was a ruler. And she was in his kingdom. Later that morning, the household gathered in the dining room for breakfast. It wasn't a family meal, it was strategy disguised as routine. Men with scars and tattoos spoke in low voices, watching Alina with curious eyes as she guided Luca into his seat. Caesar lay at Dante's feet, head on his paws, ears flicking at every sound. The conversations faltered when Alina asked a simple question. "Why do you always leave the east side of the estate unguarded?" The room went still. One of Dante's men frowned. "We don't, Signora. That side is covered by rotation." "No, it isn't." Elena's tone was calm, but firm. "I walk the grounds every morning. The east wall by the orchard. Sometimes there's no one there for over an hour. If I can see it, so can anyone else." Dante's gaze cut to his men, sharp as a blade. "Is that true?" The lieutenant shifted uneasy. "We'll fix it." Elena didn't miss the way the men looked at her afterward. Not with dismissal, but with something like respect. That evening, Dante found her in the library. She was curled up in an armchair, reading one of the books she'd pulled from the high shelves. An old history on Italian dynasties. "You're watching," he said quietly, stepping into the room. She closed the book on her lap. "I can't be blind, Dante. Not if I'm raising Luca here. I need to see the dangers before they see us." His eyes darkened with approval. "Most women would turn away. I don't have that luxury." For a moment, they simply looked at each other, the firelight flickering between them. Dante reached for her hand, his thumb brushing her knuckles. "You're stronger than you realize," he murmured. "Stronger than some of the men I command." The words sank into her like a brand. Not a compliment. A truth. Days passed, and slowly, the household began to shift around her. When Luca wandered the halls, men nodded and softened, as though his innocence gave them permission to remember their humanity. When Elena spoke, pointing out flaws, asking questions, men listened. Not because she had power, but because she spoke with the kind of honesty that couldn't be ignored. And Dante, he began to look at her differently. Not as someone he had to shield, but as someone who could stand beside him. But peace was fragile. One night, as Elena tucked Luca into bed, she heard voices outside his window. 2 guards whispering. "Albano's brother hasn't been seen in weeks. Rumor is, he's regrouping. South docks. Romano won the battle, but the war's just shifting." Elena froze, her heart pounding. She kissed Luca's forehead, pulling the blanket up to his chin, and slipped into the hall. The war wasn't over. And now she knew being in Dante's world meant she would never be just a bystander again. The estate had fallen into a rhythm. Days began with guards changing shift, the low growl of engines as convoys came and went. Midday was quiet, the sun spilling through tall windows. Luca running across the garden with Caesar at his heels. Elena watching from the bench as if her gaze could shield him. And always, Dante moved like the axis around which the entire house spun. His presence filled the air whether he was in the room or not. The men straightened when he passed. The staff lowered their voices. The house itself seemed to breathe in time with him. But to Elena, Dante had begun to look different. Not just a boss, not just the devil of Naples. A man carrying too much weight, too many scars, but still standing. And that was more dangerous than all his guns. One evening, after Luca had fallen asleep, Dante asked her to join him for dinner. Not in the grand dining hall filled with soldiers, but in the small candlelit room at the top of the stairs, a place reserved for privacy. The table was simple wine, bread, roasted lamb, olives. He poured her a glass with his own hand, his movements deliberate, as if the ritual meant something more than food. "You're adapting," he said as she took her seat. Elena arched a brow. "Is that a compliment?" His mouth curved faintly. "It's an observation." She broke a piece of bread, her fingers trembling despite her attempt to appear steady. "Do you like what you see?" For a moment, he only looked at her. The flickering candlelight catching the scar on his jaw, the shadows in his eyes. "I like that you don't flinch anymore," he said at last. "Not from me. Not from this world." Her chest tightened. "Maybe I've just gotten better at hiding it." Dante leaned forward, his voice dropping low. "Don't hide from me, Elena. Not you." The words lingered between them like smoke, heavy and intimate. Later, when the meal was done, they walked through the garden together. The night air was cool, the sky dusted with stars. Elena's shawl slipped from her shoulders, and Dante wordlessly draped his jacket around her, his hand brushing her arm. "You don't have to," she began. "I want to," he interrupted softly. She looked at him then, really looked. The man who had dragged her into this world. The man who terrified her and yet made her feel safer than anyone else ever had. "You'll ruin me," she whispered. Dante's lips curved, a shadow of a smile. "No, Elena. I'll ruin anyone who tries to take you from me." Her breath caught, and for the first time, she didn't step away when his hand slid to hers. But not all eyes were blind. From the far edge of the estate, near the east wall, a figure lingered in the shadows. One of the guards muttered into his radio, unaware of the faint glint of binoculars in the distance. Someone was watching. Someone was waiting. And though Elena's heart beat faster with every step beside Dante, the storm was already gathering beyond the walls. The estate had grown quieter after Albano's death. But it wasn't peace. It was the hush before thunder. Elena felt it in the way the guards moved. Tighter patrols, sharper eyes. She felt it in Dante too, though he didn't say it aloud. His phone calls were shorter, his orders sharper, his silences heavier. And yet, when he came to her, he left that world behind. One evening, Elena sat in the library, her shawl wrapped around her shoulders, reading aloud to Luca. The boy leaned against her, heavy with drowsiness, as her voice carried through the quiet room. She didn't notice Dante at first, standing in the doorway, watching. He leaned against the frame, his expression unreadable, as if committing the sight to memory. Elena's soft voice, Luca's small hand clutching her sleeve, the firelight painting them both in warmth. When Luca finally drifted to sleep, Dante stepped forward. His presence filled the room, powerful but unthreatening. "You have a way of making him feel safe," he said quietly. Elena glanced up, startled. "Isn't that what mothers do?" "Not all," Dante replied, his gaze lingering on her face. "You're stronger than you know." Something in his tone made her chest tighten. Not flattery, not charm, truth. Later, after Luca had been carried upstairs, Dante returned to find Elena still by the fire. She rose to leave, but he stopped her with a hand on her wrist. "Stay," he said softly. Her pulse quickened. She sank back into the chair as he poured 2 glasses of wine. They sat across from each other, the crackle of the fire the only sound for a long moment. "Do you ever miss it?" Elena asked suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. "A normal life." Dante's eyes met hers, dark and unblinking. "Normal was taken from me long ago." Her throat tightened. "And if it hadn't been..." He studied her, then leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "If I'd had another life, maybe I would have found someone like you. A home, a family, and maybe," he exhaled slowly, "maybe I wouldn't have become what I am." Elena's breath caught. For a heartbeat, she saw not the devil of Naples, but the man buried beneath the scars and shadows. "You're still that man," she whispered. He shook his head faintly, but his eyes softened. "No, Elena. You just make me want to remember him." The air between them thickened, heavy with words unspoken. His hand brushed hers across the table, calloused fingers warm against her skin. She didn't pull away, and when she finally looked up, their eyes locked, and she knew they were teetering on the edge of something neither of them could undo. But beyond the estate's high walls, the watchers remained. Hidden in the dark, they observed the devil's house with patient silence. Waiting. The night was heavy with rain. It hammered against the estate's windows, streaking the glass in silver. Thunder rolled in the distance, shaking the ground like the growl of some restless beast. Elena stood in the garden corridor, staring out at the storm, her reflection blurred against the dark pane. She couldn't sleep. Her mind was a storm of its own. Dante's words, his touch, the way his eyes lingered on her, as if she was something both fragile and untouchable. She heard him before she saw him. The quiet, deliberate steps of boots on marble. "Storm keeping you awake." His voice was low, rough with exhaustion but steady, always steady. She turned, finding him there in the dim light. Black shirt unbuttoned at the collar, damp hair from a late patrol outside, eyes shadowed but fixed entirely on her. "I could ask you the same," she said softly. For a long moment, neither moved. The storm filled the silence between them, a drumbeat of inevitability. Finally, he stepped closer. "Elena," he said, her name like a confession. "You shouldn't be here." She lifted her chin. "Where else would I be?" His jaw tightened. "In a world I can't give you. With people who don't bleed because of me. Who don't die because of my name." Her throat tightened. And yet, here I am. The truth hung between them. Not an argument, not a plea, a fact neither could escape. He closed the distance, his presence swallowing hers. His hand lifted slowly, almost hesitant, and brushed a damp strand of hair from her cheek. His fingers lingered, tracing the curve of her jaw. "You'll ruin me," he whispered. Her breath trembled. "Maybe I already have." And then his lips were on hers. The kiss was not gentle. It was fire and steel, desperation and surrender. His hand cupped the back of her neck, pulling her against him as if he'd been starving for her. She clutched at his shirt, her pulse racing, the storm outside crashing in rhythm with the storm inside her. For a moment, there was no albino, no enemies, no empire of blood. Just them. When he finally broke the kiss, his forehead rested against hers, his breath ragged. "This is madness," he murmured. Elena's lips trembled against his. "Then let me be mad with you." A rare sound left him, half laugh, half groan. His hand tightened on her waist, his control slipping, and outside, lightning split the sky, illuminating the dark fields beyond the estate walls. If either of them had looked, they might have seen the faint glint of steel in the distance. The watchers were closer now. But inside the estate, in that stolen moment, Elena and Dante were no longer prisoner and protector. They were fire. The rain hadn't stopped. It battered the estate like fists against stone, wind howling through the garden trees. Inside, the storm was no quieter. Elena's heart thundered in her chest, her lips still burning from Dante's kiss. He had pulled away once, but now he stood before her again. Closer, darker, a war raging behind his eyes. "You don't understand what you're asking for." He growled softly, though his hand was already sliding to the small of her back, pulling her nearer. Elena's breath trembled. "I'm not asking, I'm choosing." His control broke. Dante's mouth crashed against hers, deeper this time, fiercer, as though he was claiming what he had denied himself for too long. Elena melted into him, her hands clutching his shirt, her body yielding even as every nerve screamed with fire. He lifted her effortlessly, carrying her down the hall as thunder shook the walls. Every step was a vow, every breath a warning. By the time they reached his chamber, she wasn't sure if the storm outside was louder than the one inside her. The door shut. The world outside ceased to matter. Dante's hands traced her curves with reverence and hunger, his lips exploring every inch of skin he had once sworn to keep untouched. His voice was a low rasp against her ear, words meant only for her. "You're mine, Elena. From this moment, mine." Her reply was a whisper against his lips, fierce and trembling. "Then don't ever let me go." The night became a blur of heat and shadows, of silk sheets and rough hands, of whispered names and silent promises. When the storm finally broke outside, its echoes blended with theirs. But beyond the gates, in the soaked fields and the blackened forest line, the watchers moved closer. A man lifted binoculars, watching the flicker of light in Dante's window. "She's in there," he murmured into the radio. Another voice crackled in reply. "Good. Keep your eyes on them. The boss will want to know the devil's weakness." Lightning split the sky, revealing their silhouettes in the rain. Armed, patient, waiting. The devil had claimed his queen. But queens were the easiest way to break a king. The rain had stopped by dawn. Elena stirred beneath the soft silk sheets. The world outside muted, her body still humming with the memory of the night before. For the first time since she'd set foot in Dante's house, she felt still. Safe, even. And then she felt him. Dante sat at the edge of the bed, shirtless, the pale scars along his back catching the early light. His posture was taut, his head bowed as he laced his boots. A man readying for war, even after a night of surrender. "You're leaving," Elena said softly. He turned slightly, his dark eyes finding hers. For once, there was no mask of the devil, only the man beneath. "I never stay still long. It's how I survive." She pushed up on her elbows. The sheet clutched to her chest. And how do you expect me to survive if you're never here? A flicker of something, guilt, longing, passed through his eyes. He leaned down, brushing her lips with a kiss that was both tender and final. Because I'll always come back to you. Later that morning, Alina walked the estate gardens with Luca. Caesar bounded ahead, chasing butterflies across the wet grass. For the first time, Luca's laughter rang out freely, echoing off the stone walls. You're smiling again, Elena whispered, kissing his hair. Her heart swelled with fragile hope. Maybe, just maybe, she could carve out a life here. Maybe Dante's world wasn't all shadows. But in the distance, at the very edge of the orchard, something shifted. A crow startled from the branches, wings beating furiously into the sky. Elena froze, her instincts tightening. The trees seemed too still. Mom. Luca tugged at her hand. She forced a smile. Nothing, sweetheart. Let's go inside. But her eyes lingered on the orchard long after they had gone. That evening, the estate's dining hall was quieter than usual. Dante sat at the head of the long table, his lieutenants arrayed at his sides. Elena joined him. Luca beside her, the atmosphere heavy with unspoken tension. Halfway through the meal, Dante's second, in command Marco, leaned close to whisper. We found footprints by the east wall. Dante's jaw tightened. Inside or outside? Outside. But close. Elena's fork froze midair. Her gaze shot to Dante's, searching for reassurance. He didn't offer it. Instead, he reached under the table, covering her hand with his. His grip was firm, steady. But his eyes told her the truth. They were being watched. And she was the reason why. That night, as Dante stood by the window, scanning the dark fields beyond the estate, Elena slipped behind him, her arms wrapped around his waist, her cheek pressed to his scarred back. They'll use me, she whispered. Yes, Dante admitted, his voice low and lethal. They'll try. He turned, cupping her face in his hands, his gaze burning with something more dangerous than rage, fear. But they'll have to go through me first. Out beyond the orchard, the watchers marked their maps, their eyes fixed on the estate's glowing windows. The devil had finally revealed his weakness, and they would strike it. The night was quiet, too quiet. Elena stood by Luca's bedroom door, watching him sleep beneath the soft glow of a nightlight. Caesar lay curled at the foot of the bed, his ears twitching at every sound outside. Something in the silence felt unnatural, heavy, as if the estate itself was holding its breath. She almost convinced herself it was nothing. Almost. Then came the crack. A single shot, distant but sharp, split the night. Caesar shot to his feet with a low growl. Luca stirred in his sleep. Elena's heart slammed against her ribs as shouts erupted outside, the heavy thud of boots echoing through the halls. She snatched Luca into her arms just as the alarms began to blare. Downstairs, Dante was already moving. East wall. Marco shouted as men poured into the courtyard. They're probing the line, half a dozen at least. The guards scrambled into formation, rifles raised, lights cutting through the darkness. Beyond the orchard, shadows moved, quick, organized, testing the fence with sharp bursts of gunfire. It wasn't a full assault, not yet, but it was a message. Dante stepped into the rain-soaked courtyard, his pistol steady in his hand, his voice carrying above the chaos. Hold the line. Don't chase them. Make them bleed. Then let them run. The bullets tore through the night. The clash was quick, brutal. Minutes of shouting and fire before the shadows retreated back into the trees, leaving only blood in the grass. It was over as fast as it had begun. Upstairs, Elena clutched Luca against her chest as the gunfire died away. She sank onto the bed, trembling, her son's small hands gripping her neck. Mom, what's happening? Luca's voice was small, terrified. She kissed his hair, forcing strength she didn't feel. It's over, baby. You're safe. I promise. But her eyes burned with tears she couldn't let him see. Dante entered the room minutes later, soaked in rain, his shirt splattered with mud and blood that wasn't his. He froze at the sight of Elena cradling Luca, her body shaking with silent fear. She looked up at him, her voice raw. How much longer can we survive this? He closed the distance, crouching before her, his hand steadying hers where she clutched Luca. His voice was calm, but his eyes burned like fire. As long as it takes. Until there's no one left to come for us. Elena searched his face, seeing not just the devil but the man who refused to let go of her or Luca. But deep down, she knew the truth. This was only the beginning. Out in the orchard, the bodies of two fallen attackers lay cooling in the mud. One wore a serpent tattoo inked into his neck, the mark of Albano's bloodline. And somewhere beyond the city, in a place unseen, a new serpent was smiling. The estate was quieter than usual the next morning. Not peaceful, never peaceful, but heavy, like the air after a storm. Elena walked the halls slowly, Luca at her side, his small hand clutching hers tighter than ever. The guards nodded respectfully as she passed. Their eyes lingered longer than before, and she realized why. She was no longer just the woman Dante had taken in. She was the woman the enemy had fired bullets to reach. Later, she found Dante in his study. Maps of the city were spread across the table, red marks tracing supply routes and strongholds. Marco and two lieutenants spoke in low voices until Dante raised a hand, dismissing them. The moment the door shut, Elena stepped forward. "Don't keep me in the dark anymore," she said firmly. Dante looked up, surprised. "Elena." "No." Her voice shook, but her eyes did not. "I heard the gunfire. I saw Luca trembling in my arms. I can't pretend this is temporary. Or that you'll keep us safe without me knowing what we're facing. If I'm your weakness, then I need to understand your world. I need to know how to survive it." For a long time, Dante only stared at her, his expression unreadable. Finally, he rose from his chair, stepping close until his presence enveloped her. His voice was quiet, dangerous, almost reverent. "You're asking me to drag you into hell, Elena." She held his gaze, her heart hammering, but she did not falter. "Then teach me how to stand beside the devil." That night, Dante kept his promise. He showed her the estate's security systems, the hidden panic rooms, the coded signals the guards used. He placed a pistol in her hand, guiding her fingers over the grip. Her breath caught. "You'll learn," he said softly, his chest close behind her as he adjusted her stance. His voice rumbled in her ear. "You'll learn because if they come again, I want you ready." Elena's hands trembled, but she nodded. "For Luca?" "For us." For the first time, Dante allowed himself a flicker of pride. Brava. Later still, when Luca was asleep and the house finally quiet, Elena found herself with Dante again. This time not in fire and desperation, but in quiet certainty. She lay in his arms, her head resting against his scarred chest, listening to the slow, steady rhythm of his heart. His hand traced lazy patterns along her back, grounding her even as the world threatened to collapse outside the walls. "You've changed everything," he whispered into the dark. Elena tilted her head up to meet his gaze. "No, Dante, you gave me a choice. And I chose you." Afar beyond the estate, the serpent's brother sharpened his knives. But inside the devil's house, Elena was no longer a guest. She was the devil's woman, and she would never turn back. The days after the attack blurred into routine. Guards patrolled tighter, weapons were cleaned and checked twice, and the estate became less a home and more a fortress. But for Luca, the storm still lingered. Elena noticed it in the way he clung to her shirt when she tucked him in the way he jumped at loud noises, even if it was just Caesar barking at a bird in the courtyard. His laughter was quieter, rarer. That night, Elena found him curled beneath the covers, wide awake. "Can't sleep," she whispered, smoothing his hair. He shook his head, eyes glistening. "What if the bad men come back? What if they take you away from me?" Her heart cracked. She opened her mouth to reassure him, but another voice came from the doorway. "They won't." Both turned. Donnie stood there, framed by the hall light, his voice low but certain. He stepped inside, the weight of his presence filling the small room. Luca sat up, blinking. "How do you know?" Donnie knelt by the bed, resting one hand on the frame. His eyes met the boy's, no mask, no devil, just the man beneath. "Because," he said slowly, "before they get to your mother, they'll have to go through me. And I don't break easily." Luca studied him for a long moment, then whispered, "You're scary." Elena gasped softly, but Dante only smiled faintly. "Good. Scary keeps the bad men away." Luca hesitated, then slowly leaned forward, resting his small head against Dante's shoulder. Elena's breath caught. Dante froze for a heartbeat, as if unsure what to do. Then his hand lifted, strong and careful, settling on Luca's back. "I won't let anything happen to you," he said, voice rough with something Alina had never heard from him before. "That's a promise." Later, when Luca finally drifted to sleep, Dante rose quietly. Elena followed him into the hall, her throat tight. "You don't realize what you just gave him," she whispered. Dante turned to her, his expression unreadable. "What?" "Hope?" Elena said softly. "And a father." For once the devil had no reply. But his hand found hers in the dark, and he didn't let go.